It's great. It's working. Okay, so next up we have José Garay. He completed his PhD in 2018 at Temple University and now works as a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Computation and Technology at Louisiana State University. His work focuses on domain decomposition, high performance computing, asynchronous algorithms, amongst several other directions. He will speak today on Additive Schwarz preconditioners for a localized orthogonal decomposition method. So José, the floor is now yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you, thanks to all the organizers, and thank you all for being here. So today I'm going to talk about Additive Schwarz preconditioners for a localized orthogonal decomposition method. So this is a joint work with Sue Brenner and Lee Jensen. So our work is in the context of solvers for multi-scale problems. So here's the outline of the talk, but for the sake of time, let me just skip this slide and go to the formulation of the problem. So here's the standard formulation of an elliptic problem where we have a bilinear form A defined by this integral that contains a diffusion matrix denoted by calligraphic A, which is a symmetric matrix and has entries in L infinity. And all the eigenvalues of this matrix are bounded from above and below by these two constants, which are positive, alpha and beta. And this is the whole assumption that we make in this theory. So we don't make assumptions about the periodicity of the entries of A or any regularity assumption. So here is a 2D example of what this matrix looks like. Well, I mean, the entries of this matrix. So the entries of this matrix are spatial functions, and basically they are allowed to be piecewise constant functions, so with high contrast. So in these pictures, we can see how the values of these entries are distributed across the space. And the contrast of the matrix is defined by the ratio of the positive constants beta over alpha. So again, they can be like very large. There is no problem with that. So if we try to solve this problem using standard finite element methods, typically we're going to need a very fine mesh in order to resolve all the small scales, which it will be like very expensive. And we don't want to do that. So, and if we use a coarser version, if we use a coarser mesh, then this will be computable, but a bad approximation. So in these pictures, we can see on the left, the solution obtained with a fine mesh, with a very fine mesh. On the right-hand side, we can observe the one obtained with the coarse mesh. And as we can see, using a coarse mesh, we obtain a very bad approximation. Well, it will be interesting to have a method that only requires to solve a problem of dimensions similar to this coarse case, and that produces an accuracy similar to the one on the left-hand side, with the fine mesh. That will be from now on a reference solution. So, and this actually can be obtained with the localized orthogonal decomposition method. So on the right-hand side here, we can see the solution obtained with the LOD method, and that uses the same coarse mesh as before. And on the left-hand side, we can see the one obtained with the fine mesh in the standard case. So the eyeball, these solutions are the same, and basically the error is very small. So what's the idea behind the LOD method? So essentially, in this case, we're using generalized finite element spaces. So where the basis functions incorporate relevant microscopic information, and such that the dimension of the basis is small. So the basis functions are obtained by correcting the standard finite element functions with fine scale information in such a way that the corrections have local support. So they are computationally inexpensive, and you can do this process in parallel. So in these pictures, we can see on the left the standard basis function, and on the right hand side, we can see the modified or the corrected basis. And as we can observe, they are locally supported. So how do we obtain this generalized finite element space? Well, essentially, so we define a quasi-interpolate operator that basically maps the space, the standard defined standard finite element space to the standard coarse finite element space. And basically this operator is nothing but the average local L2 projection. So after this, basically the kernel of this operator will be the space where all the functions with fine scale information live. So, and if we define then the orthogonal projection onto this kernel, with respect to the inner product defined by the bilinear form, then essentially the corrections of the basis function of the standard basis functions, for example, phi, the correction of phi is nothing but the projection of this basis onto this space of fine scale information. Now, these are ideal corrections, and basically they have global support, which is something that is not actually good computationally. I mean, they provide the smallest error, but they have global support. So, but the good thing is that they decay exponentially. So basically, what we do is we replace these corrections by localized versions of these corrections. And basically, these corrections, these localized corrections, are obtained by computing the corrections, solving the corrector equation with V replaced by phi I, with PCG, with a one-level Additive Schwarz preconditioner. So essentially, we take the kth iterate of this, of this PCG algorithm. So Additive Schwarz are domain decomposition preconditioners. And essentially, in this case, each subdomain is obtained by taking a patch around a coarse node, associated with VH. So once we have built, these bases, which are computed offline, then the LOD method seeks a function in this generalized space such that it satisfies the Garay condition. So as for the errors, so if we use the ideal case, the ideal corrections, the error that we obtained by using the LOD method, that actually uses a coarse mesh, decays like h squared in L2 norm, and in energy norm, it decays like h. So these are optimal convergence rates. So now if we use the practical version, which is using the localized corrections, then if we take k, the number of iterates, large enough, then we obtain the same convergence rates. But basically this quantity here on the right hand side, I mean, is small. So essentially the number of, k is generally small. So in these pictures, we can observe the behavior of the error. These experiments have been carried out with in a unit squared with a unit function and a diffusion matrix with piecewise constant entries, and such that the contrast is 10 to the power of 3. So as we can see, the L2 error decays like h squared, and the energy error decays like h. So essentially, our theoretical results can be observed in practice. So this is another result where we can see the same, the behavior of the energy error, but now with different contrasts. So, and basically the behavior is the same. So that means that if we choose k as explained before, then we obtain the similar behavior and the ideal convergence rates. So now, so we're interested in solving a very large, a large scale linear systems. So we're interested in large scale applications. So typically, we're going to need to precondition the the linear system obtained with the LOD basis. So the preconditioner that we're using in this case is the two-level additive Schwarz preconditioner that is used for the standard coarse FEM case. So this preconditioner is known to be optimal in the sense that the condition number of the preconditional system is bounded by a constant that doesn't depend on the mesh size of the problem. And we have found that this is the case also. If we use this preconditioner, which is for the standard FEM case, then we use for the stiffness matrix of the LOD case, we obtain that it is also an optimal preconditioner for this. Now, if you look at the right-hand side, you will see that there is this contrast factor here, which you may think of, okay, well, this is probably a very large, it will be a very large, it will require a very large iteration number, but actually in practice, this is not the case. I mean, this bound here is a very pessimistic bound. So in this table, we can see how the performance of the solver is improved by using this iterative method. And basically the role of this preconditioner is not only to reduce the number of iterations, but it is also to make the method scalable. Basically, this means in the sense of scalable in the sense of iterations. Basically, this means that no matter the size of the problem that I have, if I keep the size of the problem fixed, within each processor, so if the local size of the problem is kept fixed, then the number of iterations of the method will be the same, and it will be bounded by a constant that is independent of the size of the problem. So as a way of measuring the size of these local problems, we define this quantity, which is basically the ratio between the diameter of the subdomain and the overlap. And basically, if we keep R constant, I mean, if we keep the local size constant, then this means that the iterations will be bounded by a constant. So, and in our experience, we actually observe, this result. Right? So basically, here we have the number of subdomains proportional to the number of proportional to the size of the problem. So essentially now you can think of the number of subdomains and number of processors. So I increase the number I increase the size of my problem, and I increase the size of the number of subdomains, and essentially the number of iterations should be bounded, which is the case. This is just to show you how the iterations behave with the contrast. So we try different contrasts, and basically the number of iterations are, in this case, small. I mean, with respect to, so as I mentioned before, the bound that we have obtained for the preconditioner system depends on there is a factor there that includes that refers to the contrast. Well, essentially, the contrast can be high, for example, 10 to the power of 4, and still, we get a small number of iterations. And let me just, since I have time, let me just go quick and show this problem. Essentially, this is a classical problem to test multi-scale solvers, and where basically the coefficients are highly oscillatory. So in this case, we can see actually that with this method, I mean, essentially things are straightforward. I mean, you obtain a good convergence rate for the error, and also iteration count. They are small and they scale. And okay, to conclude, we just presented a new approach for the solution of multi-scale elliptic problems that is based entirely on domain decomposition techniques and numerical linear algebra. The only assumptions that are made, with respect to the diffusion matrix is that the eigenvalues for this matrix are uniformly bounded by two positive constants. We provided a two-level domain decomposition preconditioner for the linear system associated with the generalized finite element space. And just to mention, the last thing, that the generalized basis functions are computed offline, and then the LOD linear system is solved online. And with this, I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Jose, for the great talk. And Davide, do we have any questions on Zoom?
Yeah, we actually have a couple of questions by two of the organizers. One is from Catherine. She asked, why are basis functions with global support bad computationally?
Well, because in order to compute that, if you let me see. So essentially, here we go. So this space, the kernel space is a space of high dimensions. So essentially, you will end up with a linear system that is very large. So that's why you don't want to use that corrections. Yeah.
Okay, and Usam asked, how do you partition the domain?
So essentially, what we do is, so if we have the, you mean to partition the domain for the corrector equation for this equation, or for the linear system for the the linear system for the stiffness? How can I say this? There are two equations that we solve. One is the corrector equation, and one is the linear system, for the LOD case. So the subdomains for the corrector equation are patches around each node. So basically, we take a coarse node, and then the subdomain will be the union of the elements that have this node in common. So this will be the subdomain for the corrector case. And
so it says the subdomains for the AS.
Yeah.
Okay.
The thing is that we're using AS for the corrector equation, and also for the solution of this system as well. So basically, in other words, the subdomains that we've used to solve the LOD system, they're just we just divide the original domain into squares, and basically they are just squares. When you can take any number of subdomains that you want, but they are squares basically.
Okay, thank you.
And Hussam, are there any questions on YouTube?
No, there aren't.
Okay. So we can continue further discussion when we switch together. And before that, let's